Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're diving headfirst into a document that's, let's be honest, not the most exciting read. The Ontario Standard Lease.
Yeah, it's true. Most people probably don't want to curl up with this lease for a good time, but that's why we're here, right? To help people make sense of it all.
Exactly. We're using the March 2021 Guide to the Standard Lease for rental housing to guide us. And for anyone who thinks leases are just about what you can't do, guess what? This document actually clarifies your rights as a tenant, too.
Absolutely. It's all about transparency and fairness for both sides, landlords and tenants. And the standard lease is mandatory for most agreements signed on or after April 30th, 2018.
Good to know. Okay, so let's say you're about to sign a lease. What's the first thing you should be aware of?
First thing, you can actually request the lease in multiple languages because everyone deserves to understand this information.
I love that. Now, I heard there's this thing, I don't know if it's true, but if a landlord tries to pull a fast one on you, can you withhold rent?
You heard right. If your landlord doesn't provide you with a copy of the Ontario Standard Lease, you can absolutely withhold rent. You have the right to have that document before any money exchanges hands.
Okay, good to know. So let's talk about everyone's favorite topic, rent increases. What's the deal with those?
Well, the lease is very clear that rent increases can only happen once every 12 months. And there's something called the rent increase guideline that limits how much a landlord can increase the rent.
So no more landlords trying to sneak in rent hikes every other month.
That's right, unless they have a really good reason for exceeding the guideline, like if there's a big increase in municipal taxes or if they've done some major renovations.
So there are exceptions, but they need to be justified. They can't just increase the rent whenever they feel like it.
Exactly. And even then, there's a process they have to follow with proper notice and documentation for the tenants.
That makes sense. Okay, what about all those extra fees some landlords try to add on? Things like pet deposits or crazy high damage deposits.
The lease is clear on that too. No pet deposits are allowed, and damage deposits can't be more than 1 month's rent.
And just to be clear, tenants are entitled to a rent receipt free of charge, right?
Absolutely. It's your right as a tenant.
Okay, great. So another thing that often comes up is maintenance. Like what happens when you have a leaky faucet or the fridge stops working? Who's responsible for fixing that?
That's a great question. The lease is very clear that landlords are responsible for maintaining the unit and keeping it in good working order, and that includes appliances.
So no more landlords telling tenants they're on their own when it comes to a broken stove.
Not if they're following the lease agreement. Tenants pay rent for a habitable unit, and that includes appliances that actually work.
Exactly. You're preaching to the choir.
Okay, so I was surprised to learn that landlords can't just come into your rental whenever they want. Can you tell me more about that? You're right. No surprise visits. The lease says landlords need to give 24 hours written notice before entering a unit, except in emergencies, of course, and even then there are limits. Landlords can't just pop in for a casual chat. They need a valid reason, like if there are repairs to be done or for a prearranged inspection.
So tenants have a right to privacy in their own homes. What exactly would be considered an emergency in these situations, though?
An emergency is usually when there's some immediate risk to the property or to the safety of the people living there, like if there's a burst pipe or a fire.
Exactly.
It's a balance. Landlords need to be able to manage their property, but tenants have the right to enjoy their homes in peace.
That's fair. Speaking of enjoying your home, let's say you're thinking about getting a roommate or maybe subletting your place for a bit. What does the lease say about those situations?
Well, for subletting, you definitely need written consent from your landlord. But the good news is they can't just say no for no reason. The lease says they can't unreasonably withhold consent.
Okay, so there's some protection for tenants there. What would be considered an unreasonable refusal?
Let's imagine you find a great potential subletter. Good credit, references, checks all the boxes. The landlord can't just refuse because they feel like it. They need a valid reason, like maybe they have concerns about the subletter being able to pay rent or keep the place in good shape.
It's about being fair to everyone involved. What about roommates? Any rules around that?
You're generally good to have roommates. The lease itself doesn't stop you. But you do have to follow any city or town rules about how many people can live in a unit.
Right, you can't just pack 10 people into a one-bedroom apartment.
Exactly.
Okay, let's talk about something that's a big deal for a lot of renters' pets. Can landlords still have those no pets allowed policies?
This is where the Ontario Standard Lease actually helps out pet owners a lot. It's very clear landlords can't have a blanket ban on animals in their rentals.
Wow, so no more sneaking Fido in under the radar.
Right. But, and this is important, there are some exceptions. Like a landlord can try to evict a tenant if their pet causes a lot of damage or is constantly disturbing other tenants, or if there's a real safety concern.
So it's about finding a balance again. Responsible pet ownership is key.
Definitely. No one wants pets to be causing chaos, but responsible pet owners should be able to have their furry friends with them.
I'm with you there. So how about smoking? That's another big one for a lot of people.
You know, the Ontario Standard Lease itself doesn't actually ban smoking inside a unit, but it does mention the law that says you can't smoke in indoor common areas of a building.
So how is it decided whether someone can smoke inside their own unit?
Well, there's a whole section in the lease where landlords and tenants can agree on rules about smoking in the unit or even on the property.
So it's something you discuss and agree on when you sign the lease.
Right. But here's the thing, even if smoking isn't specifically banned in the lease, a landlord can still go to the landlord and tenant board to try and end a tenancy if they think the tenant's smoking is causing problems. Like if it's really bothering other tenants or if it's causing damage or safety concerns.
It sounds like clear communication between landlords and tenants is really important when it comes to these kinds of issues.
Oh, absolutely. It's always better to talk things through early on rather than letting things become bigger problems.
Okay, good advice. Now, on the topic of safety, let's talk about smoke alarms and carbon monoxide alarms. Those are so crucial in any rental unit.
Definitely. And the Ontario Standard Lease is clear about what landlords and tenants are responsible for. Landlords have to provide working smoke alarms and carbon monoxide alarms where they're needed and make sure they're always working, like changing the batteries and everything.
So that's reassuring for tenants. You know that those safety measures are in place.
Exactly. But, and this is important, tenants have responsibilities too. The landlord provides and maintains the alarms, but tenants can't tamper with them. And if you notice something's wrong, like the alarm is beeping or not working, you have to tell your landlord right away.
It's a shared responsibility to keep everyone safe. Okay, we've covered so much in this deep dive. Rent increases, repairs, pets, smoking, safety rules. It's amazing how much is packed into this lease document.
It's really comprehensive, isn't it? The Ontario Standard Lease really lays things out for landlords and tenants and helps make sure renting is fair and transparent for everyone.
Exactly. And we're here to help you understand it all. But before we finish up, I think we need to talk about what happens if landlords and tenants can't agree. What can people do if things get really difficult? We'll dive deeper into that in another episode, but it's important to know that there is help available.
Right. It's good to know there's help out there if you need it. But of course, it's always better to avoid getting to that point in the first place. Absolutely. And understanding the lease, knowing your rights and responsibilities, that's a really good starting point. That's what makes the Ontario Standard Lease such an important tool. It gives you the information you need so you can advocate for yourself, and it helps make sure everyone's on the same page right from the start.
Exactly. So before we wrap up today, what's the key takeaway you want listeners to remember about this lease?
I think the biggest thing is to remember this lease. It's not just a formality. It's not just something you sign and then forget about. It's an agreement. It lays out the ground rules for both landlords and tenants, and everyone benefits when both sides understand what those rules are.
It's about having that mutual respect and understanding. And if disagreements come up, well, there are resources like the Landlord and Tenant Board to help you navigate those situations.
Exactly. You don't have to figure everything out on your own. There's help available.
Well said. We've covered so much ground today. Rent increases, repairs, pets, smoking, those safety regulations. It's incredible how much detail is packed into this one document.
It's a lot to take in, that's for sure. But we're glad we could break it down for you.
And hey, if you're still feeling a little lost, don't worry. You can always go back and listen to the episode again. Or check out the show notes for links to all the resources we talked about. For now, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the Ontario Standard Lease. Until next time, happy renting, everyone.